Hi, it's Bill Hitchcock, and it is April 7th, 2020. I'm just going to record a summary of our Chapter 8 stats assignment. It'll show you just kind of part of some things that you can work on, and hopefully we can run through a few things fairly quickly. Otherwise, you can go back to some of the other videos and see how that goes. So, what I've got here is my fleet information. So let me just zoom in on this. So you can see the numbers just a little bit better. It doesn't necessarily match up with what we had on some of the other videos, but that's all right. You can get the idea and we can work with it. So for your assignment, you need to do a number of different things to kind of show your expertise with some statistics functionality in Excel. So one of the things I want to do is just make what's called a scatter plot. I want to take some data and find out how is it dispersed throughout everything that we have. So I'm going to grab the year information, and if I hit Control Home, it'll take me all the way up to the top of my data, and you can see I've got it sorted by order. So I'm going to come over here to the years, grab the first field name here, year, which is in cell E1, hold my Shift key, hit the End key, and down arrow. That lets me select all that data. If you cursor down a little bit farther, you can see I've got some totals at the end here, but I just want to grab just the data. I'm going to go to Insert and choose under my charts a scatter plot, XY, or bubble chart. All right, so I'm going to choose that, and I want to choose a scatter plot. And it puts that onto my sheet, so I'm going to move the chart location and just give this thing a different name. I'll call it the year scatter. And give it just a minute. And it should put this as a separate sheet. And you can see I've got all my data kind of spread out throughout here. It is truly a scatter plot in this sense. So on the left-hand side, I've got the year. Down at the bottom, it's basically the number of vehicles. So I'm going to put in a chart element. So way up on the left hand, I choose chart element, I choose axis title. My primary horizontal axis is the number of vehicles. And for my primary vertical, we'll say it's the year of the vehicle. So if you actually kind of click on any or point to any one of those dots, it will tell you here are my 6th record in the series happens to be a 2010 vehicle. So if we go back to the fleet information and hit Control Home, here's the 6th record, and sure enough, it's a 2010. So that's how that kind of meets up with our scatter plot. All right, well, second thing I want to do is I want to find out how much does this vary from an average? And I can put that both on my chart and also when I want to compute out the variance, I want to compute out the standard deviation and show how we manually can do that. So if we go back to the fleet information and I hit End and down, go down to the bottom, you can see I've got some of these descriptive stats in here. I've got the average function in here. I've got the minimum, the max. The range is just the max minus the min. So 2018 minus 2000 gives me 18 years. The variance, you can use a function to calculate this out, but we want to do this manually, and same thing for the standard deviation, the 5.5. So what we're going to do is hit Control Home, and to compute this out manually, we're going to put in the average for the year. And I'm going to use my Format Painter on any one of these field names and Format Paint these next couple of fields out here because I'll be using some things. So for the average for the year, we'll just type in an equal sign and go and find where we've got the average reference. So I just went over to, I guess I went to the mileage column. I should have gone to the year column. Hit End and my down arrow key, it goes all the way to the end. There's the average in cell E106. So I always want to reference that cell. I'm going to hit function F4 once, twice to reference the row, hit enter, and there I've got 2009.2. Now if it doesn't show up that way as far as the formatting, if it looks something like this with a general format, you can right click on it, choose format cells, and there it is. I'm going to choose a number format. Hang on. There we go. Number format. I want just one decimal place. I'm not going to bother with the comma separator on this one because they're years. I don't want to have a comma in those. And then finally we can just hit OK. And there I've got it formatted with just the one decimal point. All right, let's grab that. Let's copy this down for all of my rows. So if I point to the fill handle, it changes to a thin plus sign. I double click on that little square box, and I've got the average put in here for all of these records. So now that I've got that selected, I'm going to hit Control-C to copy it. I get the marquee blinking around it. Come to my scatter plot. Click someplace on the chart just to select my chart, and hit Control and the letter V, like in Victor, and I paste that in, and there's our average as a line going across here. And you could right click and format this to make it look like a line rather than just a whole bunch of dots, but it just kind of gives us a baseline for our scatter plot. And you can see again, we've got a fair amount of dispersion of our data throughout this set. All right, next what I'll do is I want to go back to the fleet information. And I can hit escape a couple times to get rid of the marquee. I don't need that anymore. I can narrow up this column if we want. And let's compute out the variance. So to get the variance, first what we need to do is get the difference from the average. So maybe I'll say the difference from the, let me see if I can get up there and change that label. There we go. Difference from the year average. And the difference from the year average is just the actual year minus my average. And it carries this out to a whole bunch of decimal places. I don't need it that far. Let's just give this a comma format. Get rid of one decimal point. That will be fine. And let's try to narrow up this column a little bit. We don't need it quite that wide. And copy that one down. So point to the fill handle, double click, and if we hit end and down, there's all the differences. And if we wanted to, we could just sum these up and we should get a 0, because some of those are going to be negative, some are going to be positive, because it's all based off of the average. So if we do a sum, shift end up, it gives us an ever so small number, and if we format this, there we go, there's our 0 sum. All right, so we've got just the raw kind of difference from that. So now what I need to do is I need to take that difference and I need to square this. So I'll come up to the top, we'll say the diff squared. So that way I get more of a direction of where the variance is from that, from the median, or from the average, I guess. So if you come back to our scatter plot, essentially what I'm trying to do is take the difference between this line, this dot here, and my average, and I want to add that amount to the same thing, the difference between any one of these dots to the average line. I don't care if it's negative, because if we take the negative part of it, then it's just going to cancel each other out, but I just want the absolute amount on it. So if I go back to my fleet information, we square that. So we'll take the difference from average and do a caret and the number 2. So there I've got my number squared. Again, if you need to, you can format it, comma format, 1 decimal is plenty. Copy this one down, and I'll hit end and down. So now what I want to do is I want to sum all of those difference squared up, and I get a number, which again doesn't tell us a whole lot, but what we can do with it to get the variance is we take this number and divide it by the number of records or observations that we have in our data set, which happens to be 103. So if I compute that out, I get 29.7688, and let's format that with a comma style format. And if we come over here, let's get rid of 1 decimal point, if you will. It's 29.8. Sure enough, that's what Excel computed using the variance function, and we kind of did this showing it manually. So then to get the standard deviation manually, if you will, standard dev, we take the square root of that number, so you can use the equal square root function of this variance, which tells me 5.54 years is the standard deviation, not percent, there we go, 5.46 years. If we get rid of this, it's 5.5. So this variance, the correct units on it is actually 29.8 years squared, which again, it's a hard concept to kind of understand. So when we take the square root of that, we get just years. 5.5 years shows us our amount of dispersion of that data from average. So if we took, and what we could do is we could put in -3, and then I'll add 1 to that, plus 1. I get -2. Copy this down a little bit. Let's see if we can see all that. Let me move this off to the side here. Come on, come on. I'll delete that. So what you'll often do is you want to calculate out how many of your items fall within plus or minus 3 standard deviations, 2 standard deviations, 1 standard deviation, or is exactly the average. So we could do some calculations there. We could say it equals my average, and I always want to reference that cell, so function F4 a couple of times, and we'll add to it plus the number of standard deviations times our calculated standard deviation, and I always want to use that cell, parenthesis, and enter. And let's see if we can format this consistently so it looks a little bit cleaner. I'm going to use my average up here for the format painter, and we'll copy this down. So at 0 standard deviations, it is the average. At -1 standard deviation, it takes 5.5 from 2009.2, and it kind of gives you a feel for the spread of our data. And then we can count all these records up and find out how many of them fit into that area. I think it's something like you should, if everything was distributed normally, you'd get about 67% falls in between this area here. And so that's another kind of measure to find out how normal your distribution of, in this case, years happens to be. All right, so we've got that done. Next, what we want to try to do is let's take a look at our scatter plot. And if we look at the kurtosis and the skewness, again, those are just measures of how this data is distributed. So I want to look at my scatter plot once, and that's kind of a mess. So let's take this and choose the year, and let's sort by year. And when we do that, my scatter plot suddenly lines up more like this. And it really kind of gives you a feel for, looks like the data is pretty well distributed all throughout this whole range. So it's not like we have skewed data. It's not like there's a lot more data that's less than what the average is. There's, you know, just kind of ballparking with our eyes, we can kind of see how that lines up. So, you know, that's another way of trying to help gather some information and find out, you know, hey, do we have data all over the place? Is it heavily skewed towards the early years, towards the later years, and so on? All right, so you can try that on your homework assignment. Another thing that we want to do is we want to take a look and see if we can build our own histogram. So for the histogram, what I'm going to do is, rather than doing years, I'm going to look at mileage. And if I look at my mileage, I want to sort my data here first by mileage. So this time I'm going to go to Data and show you that you can sort from within the Data tab. So the least number of miles, I've got a couple of cars that have 3,308 miles on it. And if I hit end and down and go all the way to the bottom, it's 99,000. So what we want to do for our histogram is, let's start out with, I'll grab the word mileage here, copy that, and I'm just going to paste it down here towards the bottom. And I want to start with 0. And I'm going to go in, you can experiment, you know, 12,000 mile increments, 20,000 mile increments, and so on. The main thing is you want about 5 to 7 bins or ranges. So I'm going to take the previous cell and add 15,000 miles to it. Copy that down. So there I've got 90,000. Let's copy it one more because I want to go past what my maximum number was. Right, next what I want to do is I want to count these out. So I want to get the count. I want to get the percentage. I'd like to get the cumulative count. And finally the cumulative percent. And let's use our format painter to format paint that as well. So we go to Home, go to Format Painter. There we go, got that. All right, so for counting, we could count out manually. If I hit Control Home, I'm going from 0 to 15,000. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Nope, that's one too many. Looks like I've got 17 that are between 0 and 15,000. And I could put that in for my count right here. The other way that I can do it is I can use a series of COUNTIF functions. So I'm going to say equals COUNTIFs, and my COUNTIF is I have the criteria range, so that's going to be my miles. I want to start here at F104, hold my Shift key, end and up. I really don't want to include cell F1, I just want to include the top one there. Hit function F4 because I know I'm always going to want to reference that range. So that's my first criteria range. I'll type in a comma, and then I want to say, is this greater than or equal to, put in an ampersand to join, the value just to the left of it. In this case, is it greater than or equal to 0? If that's true, I want to count it. Then I'll put in another comma. My next criteria range is the same range, so I'm just going to type it this time rather than use the pointing method. F $2 colon F $104, and then we'll put in, I want to say it's this time less than ampersand the cell that's right below it, 15,000. Hit enter and I get 17. If I copy that down for all of these. There's 12 vehicles that are between 15 and 30, 22 between 30,000 and 45, 17 between 45 and 60,000, 8 between 60 and 75, and so on. And finally, there's none that are basically greater than 105,000. So what I want to do is I want to sum up these numbers and just check to make sure, did I really count all of them correctly? And I get 103, which matches the total number of records that we had here. There's 103. So that looks good. Now we want to get the percentages. So it equals this, the count, divided by my total 103. Function F4 on that. 16.5% and some decimals. So let's format that. Let's give it 1 decimal point. Come on. There we go. Increase the decimal. Double click on my fill handle. And if you want, it's not a bad idea, sum this up. Make sure that these percentages equal 100% as well. And it equals 1. So if I format that with my same percentage format, I can use the format painter to do it. And there we've got that. All right, other things that I can do is I want to get the cumulative count. In other words, I want to find out how many are between 0 and 15,000 and, inclusive. So for the first cell, it's just going to be equal to the count. For the second cell, it's equal to the previous amount plus my next batch. So far this 29 tells me that there's 29 vehicles that have between 0 and 30,000 miles on it. I can copy that one down. Don't total this one up because it wouldn't mean anything. It's a cumulative total. But you should see that you've got 103 vehicles for the grand total. And then finally for the cumulative percent, we're going to take 17 divided by your grand total here. Function F4. Let's use the format painter to format that percent. Widen out my column so you can read it. And we'll try to copy that one down as well. So basically, how we can read this, 66% of our vehicles are between 0 and 60,000 miles. Almost half of them are between 0 and 45%, which our average was roughly 46, I think it was, 46. I can't remember what the average for the mileage is. I can copy these over and we can find it out. There's the average for the miles and my min and max, and let's get the variance in that. Let's format all that with a comma format. Get rid of some of the decimals. We can narrow this column up a little. And we've got that. So we said we're going to do a histogram of it. So what I want to do is I want to choose the count. And I can actually include that 0 at the very end. Main thing is you're looking for, let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's probably enough. Let's just use those 7 items since the last one's a 0. We'll go to Insert. And let's choose a bar chart. And we've got that in there. And let's move this chart location. Let's call it the mileage histogram. And there's our distribution count, if you will, a frequency distribution for those years. Let's do one last thing. Let's go to the select data. Let's edit the horizontal axis label range and choose my mileage here to include that and hit OK. And that looks a little bit better. I mean, it's not a perfect chart, but at least you can kind of see how many vehicles we have at these different mileage levels. So we got the histogram. The last thing that we had to do is we want to show some ranking. So let's go back to my fleet information, do a quick rank. Let's take a look at the sold vehicles. So we want to resort our data. Let's choose data and sort. And I want to choose those that are sold. And let's put this in descending order so that way my yeses pop up to the top. We'll add another level since I want to know what maybe date they were sold on. So I can include that. So I've got all my sold records there, and finally we want to get the rankings of it. So let's put in rank, and we'll try the RANK.EQ reference. So my rank is the sales price, comma, the reference is this list of all these sold items. Now I don't want to include all the blanks down at the bottom, so we'll hit function F4 there. Hit enter, and it tells me this was the 18th ranked one. Let's copy this down, and I'm just going to do it only for those that were sold. And our looks like our number one item on the sales price was $30,600. So let's change our sort and see if this works. So instead of, we've got the sold, and let's do the sale price. And let's make that smallest to largest. Hit OK. And sure enough, there it is. There's number one, 30,600. And it goes back from that. So I hope that helps. We'll give you kind of a quick overview on getting some of these things done for this particular data set. Try it with what I have done here, or otherwise go ahead, take a look at analyzing maybe the sticker price, take a look at the mileage. It's up to you to test some of this out, analyze it, and see what you can come up with for some results. So good luck, take care.